don't expect it to be an all or nothing thing. It's not going to happen in an instant. The moment you learn how to do this well, it's not like the switch gets flipped and everything is good. First of all, you're going to get better at communicating it. You're going to get better at defending it. And trust me, you will get better at protecting it. Welcome to the Ignited Recovery Podcast, a new way forward for anyone looking for answers but feeling left out. If you've been searching for empowerment, triumph, and purpose, you've found them right here. You won't hear the same solutions, and you're not going to have any excuses to fall back on, because Ignited Recovery allows heroes to rise and become their best selves. I'm Dr. Addict, and I can't wait to be your guide on this journey. Are you ready to become an ignited hero? Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Ignited Recovery Secrets Podcast. I'm Addict Jaffe, and I'm here to talk about a topic that is really uncomfortable, especially if you are a family member of somebody who's struggled with addiction before. And the reason it's uncomfortable is because we're going to talk about boundaries. And look, when I work with parents, there's almost always this really uncomfortable time. And it's uncomfortable not because the loved one, in this case, a kid or a husband, wife, are struggling again, because that's something people are kind of used to, but it's when we have to change the way we've behaved and break old habits, specifically around endorsing boundaries. So let me explain what I mean. I grew up in Israel. In Israel, at the age of about 18, after high school, you go to the army. And everybody does this, all men, all women. And so parents are pretty lax with the rules for their kids. Why are they pretty lax with rules for their kids? Well, because, as they say, they'll fix you in the army. What does they'll fix you in the army mean exactly? Well, it means that when you reach the age of 18, you're going to go and there's going to be an officer who's going to tell you what to do. And you can talk all this smack to me right now as a kid, but if you try to do that to the officer, they will hit you, throw you in jail, do whatever it is that they're going to do in the military to fix you. All the parents have been through the military as well. And so the parents don't have to hold the boundaries because they know that at some point in the future, you will have no choice. And you know, it's funny. You see the kids that were smoking weed and drinking in high school, they figure out how to straighten out pretty well in the army. You see the kids who got in fights all the time and didn't listen to authority, they figure out how to straighten out. The parents are right. They fix you in the army there. But the thing is, it's sort of a dereliction of duty that was done by my parents around setting boundaries themselves, because setting boundaries is hard. So what they were saying is, we won't do this. We'll let you enjoy yourself in this early part of your life. And later on, you'll have to learn this from somebody else. My parents screwed up because that's the way I grew up until I was about 14 years old. And then my parents moved me to the States where there is no mandatory military service later. And so there was no time for somebody to quote unquote teach me boundaries, teach me what's okay and what's not. So, you know, when my parents tried to start doing that in the States, grounding me, giving me punishments, I laughed it off. They had no power over me because they had trained me to have no power over the years. There was always this next point. For me, I didn't have military service because I didn't stay in Israel. I had jail, and jail and rehab were the place where I was like, oh crap, there are boundaries. And if I break them, I suffer consequences in a big way and nobody can protect me. So I had to learn it the hard way. So what we're going to talk about today is the role of boundaries, how to set them, and what to do. Because honestly, when families come to us for loved ones who struggle, and in our new Family SOS program, this is one of the main things we teach, is how to define boundaries, communicate them, and then protect them. And it is difficult, especially when you're not used to having it done. Because here's the thing. For many of the parents, for many of you listening right now, even knowing what you want to protect is difficult enough. I mean, boundaries come in so many shapes. It's hard to know what your physical boundaries are if you've never had them. Behavioral boundaries, economical boundaries, emotional boundaries, work-related boundaries, right? Like physical space boundaries. There are so many different boundaries you can have. Like for me, for instance, I'm just going to give an example. You know, Sophie gets out of the shower sometimes and throws her towel on the floor. That drives me crazy. She doesn't care about it. If I put the towel on the bed, though, it'll drive her crazy, and I don't get it. Two totally different things. For me, it's about the dirty floor. For her, it's about the sheets that might get wet now, right? But you need to know that about yourself first. What are your boundaries? And if it comes to a loved one with addiction, boundaries around money, around support, around intoxication, all those things are important for you to know individually. And that means you got to sit down yourself or with a professional and figure out what your boundaries even are. Then you've got to communicate them. And if you thought understanding what they are in the first place was tough, wait till you have to have a conversation about them with somebody who really doesn't want to hear much about it. It is really uncomfortable. Coming to somebody and saying, hey, I want to talk to you about what's okay and what's not okay, what I can support and what I can't support is tough, because if you haven't done this historically in your family, then the role that's kind of been played is the boundaries are all over the place. When somebody doesn't need much, you don't give them much. When they need a lot, you give them anything that you can. And they react. It's like waves, right? It's kind of like these waves of allowance and holding back, and nobody knows what phase you're in at any given point in time. So once you understand what boundaries you want to set, the next thing is you got to communicate them across all of these different areas of life. Weird, uncomfortable conversation. And then comes the real torture, because once you've defined them and communicated them to the other person, you have to protect them. It's not enough to say to somebody, you can't use my credit cards without me knowing and without asking me, because they don't know that you're serious about it. You've never been serious about it before. So they're going to break that boundary. They're going to test it. And they're not testing it because they're evil people. They're testing it because you've never protected a boundary in your life. So they do it, and then you have to protect it. And if you defined consequences before when you talk to them about it, it's now time for those consequences. And this, by the way, in my opinion, is different than tough love. Tough love is like, I'm going to punish you and show you what the world is really about. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, hey, I'm going to have a respectful relationship with you where I tell you what I'm okay with and what I'm not. And then when that doesn't get respected, there are going to be ways that I have to protect myself. So you have to understand them, you have to communicate them, you have to protect them. And it's tough. It gets tougher the farther along you get, which makes most parents quit, or most parents even define. I've been with so many parents where I've done work and they've defined the boundaries in our meeting, try to communicate them and half-ass the communicating part because they really didn't want to be tough on their kid. And then they did nothing to protect them. And then for years, they will be caught in this cycle and they don't understand why they're not getting the results. But let me tell you this. If you don't do what we're saying here, your boundaries will repeatedly be broken. You will be upset. They will be upset. And everybody will be distraught, stressed out, and anxious and depressed about this. And that leads us towards the main reason why I think this concept is so important. And that is the red line, as I call it. I don't care if you know it or not right now as you listen to this, but with everybody in your life, you have red lines. With every area of boundaries, with every area of your life, there are red lines for you. Lines that are not to be crossed. I don't know what they are for you, but you know some of them, and then you have no idea about others. People keep pushing the envelope, they keep nudging you, they keep poking you, and it's not quite bad enough for you to establish this is my border, this is the line you just don't cross, until somebody does it and you go ballistic. I've seen this play out with families in endless ways. Cutting people out of the will, banishing them from the home, right? They've been living with you and now you're like, you have to get out of here right now. I don't want to see you ever again. Taking away the car, the credit cards, the phone, cutting communication off. I've had wives that just left the house. The boundary, the red line got crossed and they just left, literally not communicating. People end up in jail because of a DUI or something else related to their use and related to their addiction, and you just leave them there without answering the phone. Those are red lines that got crossed. It's just you didn't know that there were red lines, and why didn't you know them? You didn't do the work of understanding your own boundaries. You never communicated them, and you certainly didn't protect. So people nudge themselves closer and closer and closer to the red line. So that's one of the main reasons why you want to do the work. Because once somebody crosses the red line, this just happened to me a couple of times in the last few months with a couple of clients and families. Once somebody crosses the red line, it's a lot harder to come back because there have been real ultimatums put in place. There have been real actions put in place that have changed, altered the relationship, maybe for the long term, maybe forever. So look, life is like this in general, but if you don't do the work on the front end, you probably won't reap the rewards on the back end. And it is easy for family members to think this about their loved one. Well, if you don't do the work in rehab, or if you don't go to meetings, or if you don't read the books, or if you don't do A, B, C, D, and E, you won't be able to have a happy life. But guess what? The same is true for you. Same is true for you. Same is true for doing the hard work of maintaining boundaries. It's not easy. but it's necessary. We've got 3 kids now, right? We got Kai, Leo, and Noah. And do you think that when we go to the store, at least one of them doesn't go, I want candy, I want chocolate, I want this, I want that? Of course they do. What we're talking about here would be the fact that most families essentially do the equivalent of just throwing the chocolate at the kid and going, go for it. Here's 15 bars of chocolate. But you know that as a good parent, your role is to say, no, you can't have it. Or I'm going to buy one and we're going to split it later and you can have a little bit today and a little bit tomorrow and you do it over the next week. Or whatever your rules are at home. But as a good parent, you have boundaries around that consumption. And so you put them in place. The same is true for everything else in life. So you got to get good at this. You've got to get good at knowing your internal needs and boundaries. Again, like I said, this is probably more than half of the work we do with parents because they've never laid it out. Then how do you communicate this? And not communicate in a judgmental way. You don't come to the person and say, I've been thinking, you can't do A, B, C, D, and E again, or I will E, F, and G. That's not how you do it. There's got to be a way to communicate it in an empathic way that makes sure that they understand that you're in it together with them and you're doing this to protect them as well. You got to learn how to do it. And then you've got to defend your borders. Another little tip for those of you who are thinking already right now about, oh my God, I got to start applying this with some people in my life, is don't expect it to be an all or nothing thing. It's not going to happen in an instant. The moment you learn how to do this well, it's not like the switch gets flipped and everything is good. First of all, you're going to get better at communicating it. You're going to get better at defending it. And trust me, you will get better at protecting it. You will be tested. You will set a boundary. You have never protected a boundary before in your life. And your loved one will check if you're serious. And that means you have to protect your boundary. But if you do it right, like everything else in life, with practice, you will get better at this. Your loved one will trust you more that you are serious about these things and will take you more seriously. And eventually, you and they will be somewhere great. But only if you do the work. Now, with that being said, I challenge you, right? It's near the weekend. What can you do, right? We talked about the scavenger hunt last week. What can you do to start applying some of these boundaries in areas of your life? Communicate them effectively and then protect them. The amount of self-worth you will get from this is immense. The amount of respect you will get from other people in your life over time as you keep defending it because they're not going to be happy about it on the front end will be immense and your life will improve. So that's my challenge to you. Do the work. If you have somebody in your life who's struggling with addiction and you want to know how to do it specifically around that topic, then come to us. We help dozens and dozens of families every year do this. We would be happy to do it for you as well. Enjoy this. Take this into the weekend. Apply it into your life. Let me know at Dr. Adi Jaffe and at ignited.me what worked. What did you apply? What were the results? I'd love to hear from you. And of course, leave us a review and a rating on podcasts. We would love to hear from you. Thank you so much. Have an amazing weekend. See you next week. Thank you for tuning in to the Ignited Heroes Recovery Podcast. I really hope you found the information here useful and that we'll see you back here next week. And look, I want to make sure that this podcast is the most useful it can be for you. So please let me know by emailing info@ignited.com if there are any specific topics or questions you'd like to have addressed. As usual, if you like this episode, I would love for you to leave us a 5-star review and rating. Thanks, and see you next week.